So let's start with the so-called problem of Western thought as I see it from my POV. It's never fully explained things, so maybe in Evola's classification system, perhaps I'm not an expert on it, but maybe I have some sort of a Chinese style component to my spirit, or something non-physical of that nature. I do not know, but I certainly think more like a Chinese philosopher than a Western one. And Western philosophy is kind of lost on me, to be honest. It's never really been my thing, but I've always been a philosophical person, and graveyard philosophy is something I heard almost zero information on, which I have been fascinated by. So I'll just try and keep this hopefully to maybe 5 minutes or under 10, but it's just my second response. And I think you were right about the autism and thinking like although it's very complicated because during the when I was asking a question during your live stream, it was very correctly pointed out in the answering of the question that if you forgive, you don't just want to do it too frivolously, because the person might end up, or people or whoever might just end up doing it again. So it's a delicate balance, it's a delicate middle ground, or a tightrope kind of approach, so yeah, you were right, and it just is hard to overcome that, especially when it was done by so-called left-leaning people that said that they loved every group except my neuro type. So it was quite a hypocritical aggression that I received, so that I think the anger wasn't just towards the mistreatment, but it was towards the hypocrisy, and the injustice of like these lefties, so-called left-leaning, whatever, when I was in college and high school, would claim to love all these groups, but not my disability. So it's like doubly painful, because it's like, well, we accept everyone with difference except your autism. So it was, but yes, it became a sort of, as Richard Grannon Channel Information puts out, the information on becoming a covert narcissist through victimhood. So I suppose that was turning me into that kind of dark energy, because you dark path, whatever you call it, because of so yeah, it is hard to move on, and I'm trying, and it is hard when well, it's hard, but yes, it's correct to move forward. It's just quite difficult. I might extend this till the 10-minute mark, perhaps. So yeah, it's. I think the other difficult thing as well is wanting to forgive but not being too forgiving, so that people take advantage again. That middle ground thing. It's also the same with infrastructure, and again, I'm not gonna sound like that kind of where structural isms. I'm not going on about that with regard to my non-physical disability, but there is and it's difficult because the modern technology has really, affected the blue collar groups, which is very classism really. But and I have a lot of sympathy with that, scenario. Western blue collar, being put out of place by modernism, and even though I'm not in that group, because I would be so called classed as English middle class or whatever, but it doesn't really matter about any of that. It's what would I say? I can have a sympathy without being a member of the. I can have a sympathy with the Western working class without necessarily having to be a member of it, So, um, and I suppose the thing that I would have in common with them is that nobody cares about them and nobody cares about it. Like, you've got the tropes and straight Westerner and all that, and all the stuff that comes with that. But it's just difficult being and it's more than I in my philosophical journey, which might interest people, not just maybe you, but people on the channel, on philosophical channels, would be I've never fitted into, and this goes to like the Elect of God channel or Benedict Hans the Vegan, Nile Hill Anand channel, etc. Nihil Anand, I'm not exactly sure the pronunciation, but these channels are very interesting, and it's, to say, again, to go back to, and again, my very white belt understanding of Ebola's classification system, okay, that just again from my very layman's terms understanding of it, not from an expert level. So from my POV, that the the spirit or the non-physical doesn't always have to match the physical body. And again, I know I'm probably oversimplifying it because I'm not an expert on the subject, but if we just take that thought for a minute, if I said, I identify as, just the autism, that's not true because there's others that I have nothing in common with. Or if I identify just as a Westerner, again, that's not going to really cut it because 90% of Westerners don't have anything in common with me despite being the same nationality externally. So it's not this. It's not my the disability that is my primary identification, and it's not my nationality as a Westerner. It's I don't know what it is, but there's a very, in my case, there is a very strong, say, spirit component or non-physical component or soul component. Probably 80% of it, right? And it's I think where I am in my journey now, and I investigated, and I know a lot of, I know like the Hindu priest, the American one that you talked to, is very, very against, antinatalism and all this stuff. And I investigated it for a while, and obviously I didn't investigate it neutrally because I was so angry at the time. But the consent issue, which when I asked the question, I was probably correctly told off for, but it is hard not just going through, unique sort of negative situations, but having to watch other people go through that and feeling, having a very feeling for them on a very strong level, So it's not the case, I think, that, if you're, say my disability or anyone's, condition, it's not the case that I only care because it happens to me, because like I would feel sorry for people, something happens somewhere else, or to someone else. So it's not just that doesn't explain it. I think that's when I encounter that in debates. I think that's a falsely constructed response. So you don't necessarily have to go through something to like have a feel for people. I would say, and for me, the thing that what was it the thing that started me off on investigating antinatalism would be, I suppose, yeah, clouded by emotion and not researching it neutrally. That's a very valid response, and I'll talk to that. It's probably impossible as a human being to get to 100% neutral on your investigation. You could get to maybe 80% neutral or 90% neutral, but 100% I think is just humanly impossible, in my opinion. So the goal is to, like a science experiment, get the error percentage to the smallest amount possible, but it'll never be a zero amount. And I didn't do that. I was very clouded by, all these things. And now I sort of am more aware of that, but I think it still plays on my mind again in as neutral way as possible. Okay, without me trying to be angry or without other antinatalist channels. I think the consent issue is a very valid issue. Now I know that a lot of people in the so-called right-hand pathway would say, that it's, you signed a spirit contract before you came to the physical 3D world, and so that makes everything, every sort of, not just injustice, but every, like Lord of the Rings, Sauron style abuses of power that people are victimized by, that makes that acceptable because they signed a spirit contract before they, settled down in the physical 3D world. And I know I don't mean to sound like a Western materialist, but I think, and I'm not, it just seems like, is there a proof for that? And then someone in the right-hand pathway would say, well, yes, but it might be very subtle spiritual proof or evidence that you aren't able to detect. Fair enough, but again, for me, I just, I don't know. I just don't know about that. I think the consent thing is, and it's neutral. It's not. I'm not saying that the person said no because if they didn't exist, or if they said yes. But if the person didn't say anything at all, it's still taken as a non-yes. Like if somebody, you know, you couldn't just grab someone and, because it's a invasion of your 3D comfort space, So, and you could, if you could just grab a random person on the forearm like a no-gi grip and say, well, you didn't say no. So that's how I would feel, and a lot of antinatalist people would feel, right? Is that it's like, well, just because the person didn't say no doesn't mean that they did say yes, So it's not so much the absence of a no, it's the absence of a yes, right? It's a non-yes. The problem is a non-yes, so that might be a neutral or a no, yeah, but it's those two. The problem is a non-yes, right? I'm not even going to say there when referring to antinatalists, but I'm going to say in. I mean, do I consider myself one at the moment? I mean, probably. I mean, see, I'm trying to come from more of a. See, the thing about Western philosophy that interests me probably the most, and again, I have a very limited understanding of it, and it's not my skill set, it's not my natural flair, whatever the words we want to use, right? And it never has been. and I've never fully compatibilized with Western thought because the linear time, the rigidity. There's like a hyper rigidity in Western thought. There's the Western materialism, So there's a lot of, and there's some great stuff. The ancient Greek philosophy. So there's some great stuff in Western thought, but it's a sort of one size fits all, and it tries to force everything into a rigid box. So that is the problem I have with some branches of Western thought, not all. I think that, yeah, I think the whole thing, right, about the so-called, and this is non-dual, this is universal across East and Western thought, right? The so-called meaning of life and the so-called um, what would we say? Raison d'être, reason for being, purpose for being, seems to be ethics, right? Like so-called God, whether that's the Tao, the universe, whatever, the multiverse, whatever, right? Because we don't know, but it seems like there are two very main themes, right? Having watched hundreds of podcasts, right, throughout the years on mysticism, Eastern and Western mysticism, it would seem that why this planet, why Earth, why not Pluto, or you get my example, right? So why this place? And it seems to be okay. Number one, ethics, okay, and number two, um, amnesia. So the whole point, right, as far as I can see from all the studies, and again, it's obviously going to be limited knowledge, even if someone reaches 80 or 90 years of age. It's probably impossible for humans to know absolutely all things, or I just don't see it as possible. At least in this time era for the foreseeable future. So I think that the two main points, right, of the meaning of reality is ethics, right, and amnesia. So we take bullet point number two, amnesia, right, and some some of your channel watchers might not be into video games. That's fine, or they might think it's a bad idea. But see, there's this thing in video games where you complete the game and the memory card's full, and there's nothing to do, right? So you wipe it and you start again, and you might start on a different setting or with a different, different. You might tweak it slightly, right? Or a different character. You might have a slight tweaking of it, right, just to make it interesting, right? So I think the one of the absolute main points, right, about what is the meaning of reality, I think, is amnesia as a positive, not as a negative. So it's that the whole thing is right. There seems to be a spiritual sort of rule set, like cast iron rules, okay, and one of these fundamental, say, laws of the spiritual or the non-physical world, right, or the theological, whatever we call, one of these absolute rules is that we have to not know for some reason, because, like in quantum physicists will say this, and again, I'm very white belt on my knowledge of that, but what I do gather, I think, from it is that, and they will say this, is that um, when something is observed or unobserved, because of consciousness and awareness within objects, not just humans, it acts differently, right? The same object under the microscope, whether it's observed versus whether it's unobserved, it will have different um, consequences, different aftermaths, different experimental results. So this seems to be one of the fundamental, again, as far as I've thought for quite a while on this stuff, right? And also the Western question, the Western phrasing of it, the meaning of life or the meaning of reality, right? It again has this. I don't like to use the word arrogant, but I have no other words to use, so I just have to use that for now, even though it's not a fantastic describing term. Okay, so bear with me on this. It's the Western question, what is the meaning of reality, right? It implies there's only one. Well, why couldn't there be a few, a couple, multiple, right? Why is one, right? So that's interesting. I always think of these things. I always think in what's the word? Right brain thing. I think right brain sort of laterally thinking rather than the linear sort of mainstream style of thinking. But so which one? So you could say one meaning, and I would say one of the meanings that is most fundamental. Oh, sorry, one of the answers to that question, what is the meaning of reality, is amnesia, or we could call it positive amnesia. Okay, it seems to be the non-physical rules, the spiritual rules, the multiverse rules, the God rules, whatever they are, these cast iron spiritual non-physical laws that say, for some reason that I will never understand as a human, if I am that, and I've questioned whether I am that a lot, but is that you have to not know, and I know, again, before, Christianity and Western mysticism, they would talk, some traditions, maybe not all, some sub-schools of Western mysticism would talk about past lives, as well as Eastern uh, thought talks about past lives, right? So, I don't know, because some people would say, oh, well, that's mental illness or schizophrenia. I just do not know, okay? I don't have the intellectual power at the moment, right? I'm not sure anyone does, in my opinion, but who knows, okay? It's a speculative thing that you could go, or a Boris, dog chases its own sort of tail in a circle, right? So I think that is one of the most powerful answers to the Western question, what is the meaning of reality, is amnesia. But not negative amnesia, positive amnesia, okay? Or maybe neutral as well, right? Just like the video game, yeah, that you have to delete the memory card in order to play again. So I think you have to not know, or just like in quantum physics, the observed versus the unobserved object yields different results and behaves differently, even though it's the same object in question, right? I think that this one I've never really heard about and it's been very overlooked, but I always call it the video game scenario, as I say, where you wipe the memory card clean and you start again. You have to, because otherwise, if it was full, it would be blocked and you wouldn't be able to do anything. So I think that is one of the most powerful and fundamental, in my opinion, just in the journey, the philosophical journey that I am right now. I'm not saying that I'll always be, okay, but just from where I am, from my angle, from my personal POV of where I see my own philosophy of reality, amnesia seems to be, not in a Western medicine sense of amnesia, but in a more, yes, philosophical amnesia, if we want to call it, or soul amnesia, spiritual amnesia, right? Non-physical amnesia, but you have to not know in order for this thing to work, and you hear people, I'm not going to say only right-hand pathway, there's left-hand pathway as well, and then the centre-hand path or third-hand path, which is the one that would interest me the most. But Yeah, I would say amnesia, and the other one is, I don't know. I really don't know, but oh, ethics. Yeah, ethics is because, and all traditions, whether they are monotheistic or more organic religions, they talk about um, um, what would we call it? How to conduct a good moral existence. I mean, the ancient Greek, Western philosophers within ancient Greece uh, were pagan. They weren't monotheists. But they would, pose this question. Repeated sources mention this. So it's not just from one person within ancient Greek society that philosophized that opinion. So ethics and amnesia, and ethics, like, again, from my very limited white belt understanding of ancient Egyptian theology and spirituality, the heart that has to weigh not heavier than a feather. The heart can't be heavier than a feather to go into their version of pagan heaven, which again I'm very limited on my understanding of, but I do know the story of the heart weighing less than a feather or more, and I think that's absolutely key here. Um, so ethics. So it's not about, and this is where the Eastern thought gets correct and Western thought when it's caught in material, physical material, this sort of obsession. Not that that's a bad thing. There's positive things to Western material that can help people, but the over the topness and the one size fits all, they're trying to fit absolutely everything into that box is no good within Western thought. So it's more of an attitude problem than it is a. It's the problem is not its existence. It's aggressiveness, the way it tries to dominate and things. So I think it's not external material necessarily, and this I would say is non-dual to East and West. It's ethics and how, because a lot of people talk about, say, damage to, you know, environments or things, and but basically damage within a physical materialist concept, or things like that. And I think, but what about spirit damage or soul damage? What about bad deeds that, you know, if we talk about non-physical environmentalism or soul environmentalism, what about this, people wreaking havoc on that environmental destruction on that? So when bad ethics are practiced, on the conscious level as well as subconscious, and anything in the middle as well, in the center, is it a bit, you could say, like the Amazon jungles, the damage that's been done there, in the name of, you know capital, finance or whatever. But the point is that no one talks about the non-physical environmentalism damage, right? And there certainly is. So I think ethics um, creates a pollution, just like, say, smog would in the physical world. Bad ethics would create a sort of non-physical smog in the soul world, if that makes sense. And I know it probably might not to a lot of people, but it's like, again, non-physical environmentalism. It creates a um, pollution in the soul world, which is just as dangerous a pollution as a physical one. Although again, people, because of Western materialism, people might think that's the only religion that exists, and therefore it doesn't matter about the non-physical environmentalism, but it certainly does. It matters in a very big way. Um, so yeah, why? As I say, it's like, it's not the ethics is not dependent on necessarily external, whether you have an airplane or a donkey and a cart, right? It's about the principle of it, not the external material goods or objects. It's the, almost you could say, like the playing cards quote, it's not the cards you are dealt, it's how you choose to play them. Similar with ethics, I think. Does not matter if you have a donkey and a wagon or a space rocket or a Ferrari sports car. It's not the external. It's and maybe this is why people have been put here on the world and not allowed to leave yet. Because when you're sort of grounded and you can't go anywhere, you have to sort of come up. You have to be a bit more. You can't just escape all the time, because that seems to be the Western way with this external material, to just go to another place or escape. But when you're stuck, sort of, you can't. So maybe that's why people don't have all space rockets and all things yet, is because you have to sort of come to an internal development, which the East really, really understands. Maybe not every single branch, but let's just say traditional Eastern thought gets this much better, in my opinion, than Western thought is. Again, I'm not saying every sub school, okay, there are exceptions on both sides and outliers and everything in between, and I totally get that. I'm just saying in general, for the most part, there is a much. I mean, I know people will, maybe say Alan Watts is too modern, or he did such a thing, and that's another Western problem is, someone's done one thing and like Pharisaical kind of law or attitude, you just cast them off because they did one thing wrong. And I'm not saying let everyone do what they want wrong, but people know what I mean. You can't just, people can do good and bad at the same time. You can't just like say, oh, he did this and therefore none of his philosophical guidance is worth any. Like, that's just very daft and silly in my esteem. So you can find value even if the person wasn't 100% perfect or 90% perfect. You can find value. It can do bad and good, simultaneously. It's a complex thing sometimes, right? Which again, this sort of Western Pharisaical, you could say like old school Christian kind of thing, right, isn't really good in that sense, So it's this extreme sort of rigid, it's either on or it's off, this very sort of like digital code, O's, ones and O's in the code, ones and zeros, It's not that, it can be grey in a sense, right? So to say that, not just him, but anyone, Terence McKenna, or any of these people, oh, well, they did, this thing, so that's the end of them, in my opinion, and I'll never read their book. It's like, that's silly, because there's stuff of value in that, And I mean, Alan Watts talks about this, how, something, this excessive spirituality, he called it, and how, there'll always be, whether it's an Eastern guru or a Western priest, that's very, disciplined and etc., right? He said there's always going to be that thing that makes them human. They might smoke a cigarette or drink a bottle of whiskey, or as well as doing good things, right? So there's always going to be that sort of, it's probably impossible to be in the physical 3D world without any sort of, I mean, even Jesus had the thing in the temple with the capitals, right? So to just get, and I think you alluded to this on the channel about, if God becomes human or whatever, whether that, and I'm not saying only from a Western perspective, it can be from an Eastern too, is that when that happens, um, perfection is probably impossible to achieve, because things just get hazy or messy, or things just, just because of again, I don't know, but I only know those two things at the moment, and as I say, things are in flux and they are dynamic and they evolve and they change. Okay, but where I am in my philosophical journey is I probably am still very skeptical, right, about people on the right hand pathway that say, and I can't disprove, I haven't got a formula or an algorithm, X equals B times C. You know, I haven't got a thing where I could say, look, that proves that there was no consent. I can't do that, obviously, right? You know, but does that make everything I say invalid? I think that would be a silly conclusion to go to. So my philosophical journey is that I am maybe a Taoist. I'm certainly looking into that in quite a heavy way, Taoism. I'm definitely a Taoist investigator, and I gel with a lot of that Taoist and Chinese thought, and then the other is antinatalism, as I say, because of the no consent thing. And I know we can't prove that it's presence or it's absence, I know, but just because of the lack of it, because of a non-yes in my research, from all the research I've done, because of the presence of a non-yes, whether that's a neutral, whether nothing was said or whether no was said, it's because of the non-yes. That's really, I'm sorry, but that sort of gets to people, including me, within the antinatalist sort of sphere, right? But then, as I say, that's is that an emotional sort of kind of childish reaction? Maybe it is, because some of it is anger and emotion from the not just personal negative experiences, but negative experiences that happen in the world and injustices that happen in the world. So that comes from that, you know, the it's not just me that coming at that angle from. It's also anyone with injustice, right? It's yes, it's hard to take the emotion out, but I'm trying to be more rational. My earlier videos a year ago or more were much worse than that, much more, aggravated and unhealthy, and negative. So I'm trying to be more, as I say, 100% impossible, but I'm trying to be more neutral. I'm just trying to make a concerted effort. I'm not just ranting for the sake of ranting. I'm trying to think and try and be cool-headed as much as possible. So, what do they say? The jury's out on that question in terms of philosophical phrasing. On the consent thing, like, we can't prove yes, we can't prove no, so fine. Both sides, the pro and the against, it would just be an endless circle of arguments. So it's not productive, but that is what would bother a lot of AN people, anti-natalist people, is the lack of a yes. Yeah, not the presence of a no necessarily, but the lack of a yes. So and yes, adding on emotion after that. But the consent would be the number one issue, and then the injustices would follow on from that, right? And yeah, I think I'll kind of leave it there. I might go on a couple more minutes, and I did not mean to go on this long, but yeah, the fundamental sort of answers that I've come to are the number one bullet point, amnesia, positive amnesia, and number two, ethics, morality. That it's not about external technology, it's about ethical decisions. John Anthony West, the Egyptologist, who I know, again, people, might say things, whatever. I don't really care. The point of this is that he actually said in an interview that there's a spiritual report card, and he said that that's an important thing. And I'm paraphrasing. I can't word for word remember the exact sentence but he did. He said there's a spiritual report card, in the non-physical world, right? And it'll come to people, So I think, and again, it's the problem with, it's like the Matrix 2 Reloaded. So in your interview with Dutton, you said the more you pin it down, the more it gets away. So I would say that if anyone's ever watched this particular scene in Matrix 2, where he runs through the subway, right, in order to run away, to get away, and he ends up on the other side, a bit like a quantum loophole or something. He ends up going through the black tunnel and coming out, then he's back in the same place. So the more he runs away, the more he returns to the same place, So I think that's very similar, in my opinion, to that quote in your Dutton interview where it said, where you said about the more you try and pin it down, the more it escapes. It's I suppose a bit like a quicksand analogy. I know that's not real life quicksand, but the old understanding of it, the mythical understanding of it, that, or yeah, I don't really know, but yes, the more you try and grab onto it, the more it gets away. And Alan Watts talks about this, and then there's a sort of like a boomerang, what I call a boomerang method or technique, where you let go of it and it come back to you. And I know, again, those weapons in real life, they don't do that, but I'm just talking about the mythology of it. Yeah, is that when you grab on, it goes away. It's Newton's third law. It is Newton's third law. When you grab on, it goes away, but when you let go, it comes back. So it is like, again, if anyone's seen that scene in the subway, the film Matrix 2, with Neo, he runs through it in order to keep trying to escape and ends up repeatedly in the same place. So it's very curious, and that's a very metaphysical truth that is hidden in that film. For anyone who cares to watch that particular scene on the DVD, but it's a very powerful message in that scene, and yeah, ethics and amnesia, really, I would say, because as I say, the ethics thing runs through every single tradition, East, West, monotheist, pagan, all sorts of stuff, right? So that seems to be quite significant. That would run through every single tradition in almost every nation, right? So there's probably something to that. Yeah, it would be very bizarre if there was nothing to that. Amnesia and ethics, right? I mean, I suppose some people could say if you knew. I mean, it's the same with, if you're in an academic class or a sports class, right? If you are absolutely perfect and 100%, flawless at whether it's, a sports class or an academic, written kind of class. If you're perfect at every single topic, then there'd be no point even turning up because you know it before you went there. So there'd be no point even going to the class, right? So I think it probably, the meaning of reality has something to do with that. With regards to amnesia, is that you have to not know in order for things to unfold, right? Because if everything, like a video game, if everything was already done, then nothing, all the energy would be blocked, right? So, yeah, it's just to wrap up. What would it be? To wrap up would just be that, yeah, those two things, the meaning of reality, amnesia and ethics, and then also that I would think more like on the Chinese philosophy side of things rather than the Western thought end of the spectrum, and that I am sort of in a Taoist kind of mode or phase, and it definitely makes sense to me, the Chinese style of thought and philosophy. It really does kind of, make a lot more sense than the Western one. Just for my life, if Western helps other people, that's a great thing. So yeah, I use it as a helping device, the Chinese style thought and Chinese philosophy, and sort of ancient China's wisdom, So yeah, it will. I suppose at the end of the day, as much as it's I mean, I would say Niccolo Machiavelli of the now I think the 1500s, possibly maybe late 14, did have a very strong point, about you know certain things, the unfairness and the injustice. But he obviously maybe didn't think of it in the same way as maybe I do. But it yeah, it doesn't. It seems like it's complicated, I guess. But there's definitely a lot of. I know the human brain notices negative information more than positive information, so maybe there's a large percentage of bias there, perhaps. But it seems like the people that cheat seem to win, and the people that are honest seem to not win, and it doesn't really seem fair. Because if karma was true, then the honest would win and the dishonest might not. So it doesn't really seem fair that you know that it's like topsy turvy that's inverted. It doesn't really seem fair. And I suppose this is where people would say, I'm not saying I espouse all of this information, but this is where people would come to the conclusion that maybe God doesn't it's non-good, and by non-good it can mean neutral. It doesn't have to mean evil. It can mean neutral or evil. But I tend towards the middle one. I'd say maybe neutral. Doesn't have to be. As I say, I would say non-good. I would say possibly neutral. But again, it's such a big question. Who knows? But just because of the things that happen, it's not something that all powerful allows things like that to happen. That's not, in my view. That's not acceptable. So yeah, but um, I suppose just to wrap up from the start of it, it's about, I suppose, personal journey, but then a sort of greater journey. That you start with yourself and it branches out. So in my journey, it's that I'm sort of it's Taoism, and then in a more sort of layman's terms, forgiveness in my own life of things, of other individuals. It's very hard to do when people are still doing it. That is the thing as well. With my condition is like whether it's like the infrastructure being set up for them, and I'm not gonna get all thingy, but it's just difficult. It's just difficult because when it's still happening, if it was something that happened a long time ago, it never happened again, but when it's still happening, it's difficult. But yeah, we'll move on from that So it's about moving forward. But it was a good live show the other day, but it was very late in England. But thank you for answering all the questions. I don't mean to ask too many, but there isn't really anywhere I can go philosophically. I do have a local Western philosophy club, but I'm always talking about Eastern, and people don't really understand what I'm on about, so that presents some difficulty. So you're one of the only centres of information I can go to that really helps with the, answering sort of certain types of queries, So it is very helpful, thank you, and yeah, um, I find it very useful, and it's one of the only places I can go for questions of that nature. Got almost nowhere else, so thank you a lot. And also the Terence McKenna talks about language, and also Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein says there's no problems with philosophy, only problems with language. So obviously, anything I say or anyone says on a vlog or a book or a blog or anything is language, and then you can't control how someone else interprets that language. So language presents so many opportunities for chaos that it's really difficult to kind of. It's not like telepathy, it's not direct, so it creates so much room for chaos and misunderstanding, you know. So that obviously is a problem, because I think in almost like hieroglyphics, I think in like sort of boxes and shapes and theories and energy, like I feel an energy or I see a sort of concept, but it's not. And it's a bit like the yin yang symbol in Chinese or ancient Egypt hieroglyphics. It's more a concept than a word or a language. So converting that into human language is quite difficult. But I tried my best. But it'll never be perfect, because, as I say, I don't think in language. I think in like concept and hieroglyphs, um, really, and energy. Um, it is a sixth sense, kind of, one of them, um, which would be interesting to do one on as well. Which, yeah, I have that. So, thank you.